Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora.
Life is simple. We're all born to this world to share, to live, to be one with one another. We were not put here on this earth so that 1% of our world control more wealth than the 60% at the bottom. Mana's aim is to make sure that te pani me te rawakore, the poor and the dispossessed, get an even shake in life. We don't really care what the rich think. Our aim is to lift our own people to a situation where they can control their own destiny. Mana up, mana hard, mana motuhake, mana forward. Kia ora tata.
We're here at the Mana economic policy launch here, and we've got policies here that will bring relief, I think, to people in low-income communities, and they'll bring a few sleepless nights in Remuera. But they're policies that are fair and just, and that reward people who actually do the work that creates the wealth in the first place. The real money is being taken out by a very tiny number of people from our economy. That money should be back into the economy to support children and particularly people on low income, so that we can provide free dental care for everybody. We can provide free meals for kids in schools, and our policy is for just $38 million we're able to provide meals in decile 1 to 3 schools, breakfast and lunch. That's a very small investment compared to the sums we're talking about being sucked out of the economy by a very tiny number of people at the top.
How will this happen?
It'll happen through a financial transactions tax, which gets rid of GST. It will happen through progressive taxation, through a proper capital gains tax, and the money, the unearned income which many people receive at the moment, would be taxed, and that would provide an enormous amount for investment, for social investment, but also for economic investment.
If Mana do get in, when can we see the changes in the free dental and
Well, you know, we're not naive enough to believe that we're going to be in government this November, but we're here to fight for this transformation of our economy, and we believe the ideas will resonate with a lot of New Zealanders once they have the opportunity to engage with them.
Do you believe this can happen, though?
Oh, it can, and it will, and it must. What's happening at the moment is completely unsustainable. We cannot have these enormous sums of money being sucked out of the economy while people are driven further and further into poverty. It's just not sustainable, it's not moral, it's not ethical, it's obscene, and it has to stop.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, John. John, how revolutionary do you think your ideas are?
Well, they're very revolutionary in the New Zealand context, but in fact in the international context they're not. I think these ideas would have been very much mainstream 30 or 40 years ago, but New Zealand has changed so much. We've had Labour and National captured by the new right for so long that these ideas seem radical. But you know, to our parents and our grandparents, they wouldn't have been radical at all.
Oh, the progressive taxation is an old idea, obviously.
It is. It's an old idea, and that's the progressive taxation is what came in after the Great Depression, and that's what made New Zealand a successful, prosperous country from the 1930s up to the 1980s.
So it's just agitation by the wealthy, small percent that has seen taxes driven down.
Well, it is, and they have captured the economic policies of our major political parties, and they've done that around the world. And it is a very small number of people who've done that. It happened in New Zealand in 1984 through Labour, through probably just a dozen people in business and in the circles, political circles. So that dozen people had an enormous influence in New Zealand, all for the negative, and we have to win that back. These are the problems in New Zealand that our economic justice policy is designed to address. We've had declining quality of life for the last 27 years. We've got kids with third world diseases, 200,000 kids living in poverty. I mean, that's a disgrace in a land of plenty. We've got extreme wealth, extreme grinding poverty, and we've got Labour and National, their policies captured by the 1%. This graph here is a national disgrace, because this puts New Zealand as the worst country in the world for increasing inequality in the last 27 years. So this graph here shows New Zealand is the worst. We've had the highest growth in inequality compared to any other OECD country. And that means that the rich have got richer, much richer, the poor have got much poorer. I've got a couple of graphs here that show what's happened with wages here compared to Australia. We've got the New Zealand wages having flatlined here. They're static, they're stagnant. In fact, they're not even keeping pace with inflation. Whereas you've got the wages in Australia increasing steadily. The labour. We've also got here a similar story here with the share of income that workers get in New Zealand has dropped from a peak of about 60% of our GDP down to below 50% of GDP now. So workers have gone backwards while profits and the benefits for the 1% have increased. And here's the problem in figures. The wealthiest 150 New Zealanders had an increase in wealth of $7 billion last year. We had CEO salaries rising rapidly compared to the wages that workers receive. That's another disgrace. We've got wealth in New Zealand is distributed very extremely unequally, I suppose you'd say. The wealthiest 10% of the population hold 50% of the total wealth. And then if you look at the other end, you've got half of the country, half of New Zealanders control just 5.2% of our wealth. So we've got this massive inequality, we've got massive injustice, and our policy aims to change it. So the solutions are these first three. $15 minimum wage from 1st of April 2012, then peaked at 2/3 of the average wage. Abolish GST altogether. First $27,000 income free. Okay? These three policies would add over $200 per week to spending power to a person on the minimum wage. And where does it come from? How are we going to pay for it? We pay for it through taxes on the 1%. A honeheke financial transactions tax to bring $15 billion to replace GST. Progressive taxation with the rate increases on higher incomes. Proper capital gains tax. And an inheritance tax, which we used to have in New Zealand, but we gave it up. We need to bring it back in. Kia ora. Thank you very much.
I'm very pleased to be here to support John and support the Mana campaign. I think that the policies that Mana are putting forward are policies that are in the interests of working people and certainly in the interests of our members. They want to redistribute wealth. They want to make the economic system fundamentally different in terms of who it serves, that it should serve the majority. They want to empower working people to be able to fight. They want to make unions stronger in New Zealand, and they want to deliver benefits or social, they're not really benefits in my view, rights that New Zealand has had, the right to education, the right to health care, the right to a job, make these actual rights in New Zealand society.
So we're here with the launch of John Minto's social policies for Mana, and looking at the huge gap between rich and poor that's opened up in New Zealand. So we have our protest camp over here, the 99%, but I think for the movement to go forward we need to talk about some solutions to the problems of the gap between rich and poor, and that's what Mana is offering to the movement today. So what we're talking about is taxing the rich, taxing the wealthy until they bleed, tax the big banks and the speculators, 1%, the honeheke tax, and use that money to abolish unemployment and abolish GST and abolish child poverty in New Zealand. And so if the rich were taxed, not even at the rate that we are, even just if we taxed them at 1% of their fabulous wealth, we create enough funds to get on with the vital, important work with the most severe social problems we have as well. I think Mana also offers a vision for the future. It's not just about some small reforms here and there. We want a society where there's full employment for all, and housing for all, free education for all, free dental care for all. All of these things are easily achievable in societies of abundant wealth, which is what we have in capitalism. If that takes a fight on the streets as well as in Parliament, then Mana is ready for that. A lot of us have been active in the Occupy movement from the word go. We've been active in the campaign for a living wage, unionising the poorest workers in New Zealand. So what we want to see is not just 3 or 4 MPs elected into Parliament, but we want to see real social change, revolutionary change in New Zealand to end the rule of the 1% and start the democracy of the 99%.
We can see the message in your shirt here. Let's take a look here. Democracy is not just the right to vote, it is the right to live in dignity, and this by Naomi Klein.
Well, that's very true. You know, we have formal political democracy in the West where people get a chance to vote once every 3 or 4 years and it takes you 10 seconds. You'd be lucky to get a minute of democracy in your life. Minute or 2 minutes of democracy. But actually, if you look, all the real decisions in society are made at the top of all these buildings, in the boardrooms and the CEOs of corporations. And most of our life we're spent at work, working for these organisations. There is no democracy there. So I think we're trying to say that we need more democracy in our societies, not just in Parliament, but actually workers' control, community control over our own resources. And if people had control over their own resources, we wouldn't allow things like homelessness. We wouldn't allow things like child poverty or hunger. We would abolish that on day one. So that's why I think MANA and the programme that it has and some of the policies that it's pushing is a vital kick in the arse and a vital dose of reality to political discourse in New Zealand. We're sick of Pepsi versus Coke, Labour versus National politics. It's crumbs off the table, but no fundamental challenge to the market system. That's what MANA offers. And I think the most beautiful thing about MANA as well is it recognises the role of Tangata Whenua. It's Maori-led. This was Maori land. This economic system that rules New Zealand capitalism, there was no democratic vote on that. This was imposed on the people of Aotearoa through force of arms. So MANA actually represents the future. One day this country will be called Aotearoa, and Maori and Pakeha migrants, we will live in peace together. But we recognise that Tangata Whenua are the first people of this land. They were treated terribly, disenfranchised, had their land stolen off them, they were killed. This system ruled here through blood and war. So that's a very important injustice that all people in Aotearoa need to resolve. I think MANA can do that.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Ko Stan taku ingo, no Waikato mana kotoa hau. Ka tino tautoko au te mana movement. Tēnā koutou. Tēnā tatu.